break room at Hendricks and Morrow smelled like burnt coffee and someone's microwaved fish from 3 hours ago. That smell never changed in 22 years. I know because I was the one who complained about it every single time, and nobody ever listened, and somehow that became its own kind of comfort. I was 53 years old, lead systems architect, and I knew where every wire in that building ran. Not metaphorically. Literally. I had drawn the original network topology on a whiteboard in 2003, photographed it with a disposable camera because we didn't have smartphones yet, and rebuilt it 3 times since. The 4th rebuild was supposed to start in the spring. It never did. My name is Martin, and this is the story of the best Tuesday of my entire professional life, which started as the worst Monday morning I can remember. The CFO's name was Trevor. He was 31 years old, had an MBA from a school whose name he dropped into every 3rd sentence, and had been brought in 18 months prior by the board to modernize the financial infrastructure. What that meant in practice was that he sat in a glass office on the 4th floor, scheduled meetings about meetings, and used the word scalable the way other people use punctuation. I had nothing against Trevor personally. I genuinely didn't. He was the kind of guy who would shake your hand too hard and ask about your weekend with the energy of someone who had read a book about asking people about their weekends. Not malicious, just hollow. His father-in-law was Douglas Merritt, chairman of the board, the man who had approved Trevor's hire over 3 internal candidates with actual backgrounds in financial systems. I had met Douglas exactly twice. Once at a company retreat in Phoenix, once in an elevator, and both times he looked through me the way people look through a window they're not interested in. Trevor called me into his office on a Monday. October, the kind of October morning where the light comes in at a low angle and makes everything look more serious than it is. He told me the company was moving toward a more agile operational model. I waited. He said they were restructuring certain legacy roles. I waited some more. He said, "Martin, we appreciate everything you've contributed, but we need people who can grow with us into the next chapter." There it was. I asked him what that meant specifically. He said they were transitioning my position. I asked him to be direct. He looked at his laptop screen for a moment, actually looked away from me at his laptop which was showing his email, and said, "We're letting you go, effective end of day." I had 47 minutes of accumulated PTO I'd never taken. My health insurance ran through the end of the month. My severance was 6 weeks. 6 weeks for 22 years. I signed the paperwork. I shook Trevor's hand. I went back to my desk, packed my coffee mug, my spare phone charger, and a photo of my daughter at her high school graduation. Security didn't escort me out, which I thought was decent of them. On the way to the elevator, I passed Nate from the help desk. He was 26, had started 8 months ago, was sharp as a tack, and was now, apparently, the person responsible for maintaining the entire back-end infrastructure I had built. He gave me a look that said he knew and he was sorry. I gave him a look that said good luck, and I meant it sincerely. I drove home. I sat in my car in the driveway for about 10 minutes. Then I went inside and made a sandwich. I want to be honest about the next few weeks because I think people on the internet skip over this part and it matters. It was not immediately triumphant. The first week was disorienting in a way I hadn't expected. I'd been getting up at 5:40 a.m. for 2 decades. My body didn't know what to do with itself. I'd pour coffee, sit down, and realize I had nowhere to be, and that feeling wasn't relief. It was this low-grade anxiety that sat behind my sternum like a stone. My wife, Carol, was patient with me in the way only someone who has been married to you for 26 years can be. She didn't tell me it would be fine. She didn't make speeches. She just kept the house normal, made dinner, watched the news, let me work through it quietly. I updated my resume for the first time since 2009. That alone took 2 days. I reached out to some contacts, had a few conversations. Nothing materialized immediately, which is how these things go at 53, in case nobody's told you that. The market isn't hostile, it's just slower. People need to trust what they can't see yet. I also did something I hadn't done in years. I slept 8 hours. 6 weeks after I left Hendricks and Morrow, my phone rang at 7:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was a man named Preston from their IT department, a guy I vaguely remembered from a few interdepartmental meetings. His message was short. He said there was an issue with the payroll processing system, and he was hoping I might be available for a quick call. I listened to the message twice. Then I got up, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and thought about it. I called him back around 10. He sounded relieved to hear my voice, which told me something. The issue, as Preston explained it, was that the payroll batch processing, the system that ran every other Thursday to generate direct deposits for all 340 employees, had failed the night before. Not partially. Completely, it had produced no output. The deposits were not processing. Payday was in 36 hours. I knew exactly what had happened without him telling me. When I built that system, I had documented a very specific sequence for the quarterly certificate rotation. It had to happen in a particular order, touching 4 different servers, with a manual confirmation step in between. I had written that process document in 2018, updated it in 2021, and left a printed copy in the infrastructure binder that lived in the server room cabinet. I asked Preston if anyone had rotated the SSL certificates recently. Long pause. "I think someone did that last week," he said. "Nate handled it." There it was. Nate was good. Nate just hadn't known about the confirmation step because nobody had told him to read the binder. Or maybe he had read the binder and missed it. It didn't matter. The system was broken and 340 people weren't going to get paid on Thursday. I told Preston I appreciated him reaching out and that I hoped they got it sorted. He asked if I could come in. I said I wasn't currently available. He asked if we could do a call with Trevor. I said sure. The call was at 2 o'clock. Preston, Trevor, and a woman named Judith from HR who I had always liked and who sounded deeply uncomfortable to be on this call. Trevor's voice was different. The MBA cadence was still there, the practiced calm, the measured tone, but underneath it there was something tight. He thanked me for getting on the call. He explained the situation as if I didn't already know it completely. He said they were exploring their options and were hoping to leverage my institutional knowledge. I let him finish. Then I asked him, very calmly, what exactly he was looking for. He said they needed someone to walk their team through the recovery process. I said I understood. I said that kind of specialized consultation typically ran between $250 and $400 an hour for someone with my background, and that given the time-sensitive nature of the situation, I'd be willing to make myself available on a rush basis at the higher end of that range with a 4-hour minimum. Silence. Not long silence. Maybe 4 seconds. But the kind of 4 seconds that contains a lot of information. Trevor said he'd need to check with finance. I said of course, and that my availability was limited, so if they could let me know by end of business, I'd hold the time. He called back at 3:45, agreed to the rate. 4-hour minimum, $400 per hour. He asked if I could start first thing in the morning. I said I could do Wednesday at 9. I made $1,600 that Wednesday. Fixed the issue in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Spent the remaining time documenting the recovery process in enough detail that a reasonably competent person could follow it without calling me again. On my way out, I stopped by Nate's desk. I told him the fix was in, walked him through what had happened, and made sure he understood the confirmation step. He looked embarrassed. I told him not to be, that nobody had set him up to succeed and that wasn't his fault. He thanked me. I meant what I said. I did not thank Trevor. Now here is the part I didn't see coming. About 3 weeks after the payroll incident, I got a call from a woman named Agent Christine Holloway with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. She asked if I would be willing to speak with her about my time at Hendricks and Morrow. I said yes, obviously, because you say yes to that call. We met at a coffee shop near my house the following Thursday. She was precise, professional, and did not waste words. She explained that they had been conducting an investigation into certain financial reporting irregularities at Hendricks and Morrow. She said my name had come up as someone with direct knowledge of the company's financial data infrastructure, specifically the reporting systems that fed into their quarterly filings. I knew those systems. I had built the data pipeline that connected the general ledger software to the reporting module. I had also, on 3 separate occasions over the past 6 years, raised concerns internally about the way certain transactions were being categorized before they hit the reporting layer. Those concerns were documented. I had sent emails. I had put things in writing because I was the kind of person who put things in writing. Douglas Merritt. The chairman, Trevor's father-in-law, had been on the board during all 3 of those periods. I'm not going to pretend I fully understood everything Agent Holloway told me that afternoon. Financial fraud investigations are complicated, and they move slowly, and the details are layered in ways that take years to untangle. What I understood was this. The reporting infrastructure I had built had been used, without my knowledge, to route certain numbers in ways that obscured what was actually happening underneath. And the documentation I had, the emails, the architecture diagrams, the change logs, were apparently quite useful to people who were very interested in exactly what had been happening underneath. I agreed to cooperate fully. I provided everything they asked for. I testified before a federal grand jury 4 months later. I want to be clear, I did not set any of this in motion. I did not call the IRS. I did not go looking for trouble. I built a system. I raised concerns through proper channels. I got fired. And then a federal investigation found its way to my door and asked if I remembered anything. I remembered everything. I had the emails to prove it. Douglas Merritt was indicted on 4 counts of securities fraud and 2 counts of filing false financial statements. Trevor was named as a cooperating witness, which tells you something about how quickly that MBA composure dissolved when federal prosecutors sat across from him. I read about it in the paper. Carol brought it to me at the kitchen table with my coffee and set it down without saying anything. We both read it. Then she got up and refilled her mug and said, That was it. That was the right response. Let me tell you what I actually learned from this, because it's not what you might think. I did not learn that bad people always get what's coming to them. I've been around long enough to know that isn't true. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the Trevor of the world move on to the next company and do the same thing, and nobody ever connects the dots. What I learned is that documentation is not bureaucracy. Documentation is memory. When you write things down, when you send the email instead of having the hallway conversation, when you put your concerns in writing instead of just voicing them in a meeting, you are creating a record that exists independently of anyone's willingness to remember it correctly. I had 22 years of written records, change logs going back to 2004, email threads where I flagged concerns that were either dismissed or quietly shelved, architecture decisions that were overridden without documentation of why, all of it sitting on a server I had backed up off-site because I was the kind of person who backed things up off-site. And when you've built infrastructure for 2 decades, you develop a bone-deep distrust of single points of failure. That one habit, built over years of just being thorough, is what made me useful to a federal investigation. Not my title, not my seniority, not my years of service, my documentation. I want to say one more thing about Nate because I think about him sometimes. He called me about 2 months after everything became public. He left Hendricks and Morrow, found a position at a smaller firm, better title, better pay. He said he wanted to thank me for not making him feel like an idiot that Wednesday morning when I showed him the fix. I told him the truth. The setup had been wrong from the start. They handed him a plane and told him to fly it without a license or a map. That wasn't incompetence on his part. That was negligence on theirs. He said something I've thought about since. He said, "You didn't have to be decent about it. You could have let me just figure it out." I said, "I know. But what would that have accomplished?" He didn't have a good answer for that. Neither did I, really. It's just how I was raised. I'm working now. Consulting, mostly. A few long-term contracts with firms that want someone who's actually built things, not just theorized about building them. The rate is better than what I was making at Hendricks and Morrow. The commute is better. I set my own hours. Carol says I seem less tired than I used to. She's right. I didn't know how tired I was until I stopped. The fish smell in that break room. I don't miss it. The people, some of them I do. The work itself, the real work. The kind where you're solving something that actually matters to actual people. I do that every day now, and nobody's telling me it isn't scalable, or that I need to grow into the next chapter. I am the next chapter. Some mornings I sit with my coffee before Carol gets up and the house is quiet, and I think about that Monday in October. The low angle of light. Trevor looking at his laptop screen instead of at me when he said the words. I don't feel bitter about it. I genuinely don't. Bitterness takes up space. I have better uses for. What I feel is something closer to clarity. Like a window that was foggy for a long time and then someone opened it. If you're in a version of that room right now, if someone is using the word agile to tell you that your years don't count, write everything down. Send the email. Keep the copy. Do the job right, even when they're not watching. Not because they'll notice, they probably won't, but because the record exists whether they notice or not. That record is yours. They can't fire it. I've thought about what I would say if someone asked me whether I planned any of this. The honest answer is no. I didn't engineer Trevor's downfall. I didn't call anyone. I didn't wait with a plan. I just did my job well for 22 years, raised concerns through the right channels, wrote things down when other people would have let it slide, and then went home when they told me to. That's the part people want to skip over. They want a story where the protagonist is clever and deliberate, where every move is calculated. Real life isn't that. What actually happened is that I was thorough for 2 decades, and that thoroughness had a kind of mass to it. Weight that kept accumulating quietly until the moment when it mattered. And when it mattered enormously. There's something to be said about the relationship between how you do small things and what happens to you in large moments. Trevor dismissed me because he saw a man whose best years were behind him. What he didn't see, what people like him rarely see, is that every year of experience had produced something concrete and documented and real. Change logs, email threads, architecture decisions with dates and reasoning attached. None of that disappeared when I handed over my badge. It came with me, sitting in an encrypted backup drive in my home office, because I was the kind of person who maintained off-site backups. I think about Nate sometimes too. He was put in an impossible position, handed a complex system with incomplete knowledge, and told to keep it running. When it broke, the easy thing would have been to let him absorb the blame. I didn't, because it wasn't his fault, and because letting a young person take the fall for a structural failure isn't strength. It's just another version of what Trevor did to me. You don't build anything good by letting people fail in silence. What I've come to believe is that integrity isn't a reward strategy. It's not something you practice because it pays off. You practice it because it's the only way to look at yourself clearly in the morning. The fact that it eventually intersected with a federal investigation and exposed people who had been routing numbers through systems I built. That wasn't justice delivered from somewhere above. That was cause and effect, plain and simple. I had created a paper trail because I cared about the work. That paper trail became evidence because the work had been misused. One thing led to the other. Carol asked me once, during those first disorienting weeks after I was let go, whether I regretted staying at Hendricks and Morrow as long as I did. I had to think about it for a while. The answer is no, not because it ended well, though it did, but because I did the work right. That's what I'd want my daughter to take from this if she's ever in a similar room, facing a similar moment. Not the outcome. The approach. Do the work right. Write it down. Don't make it personal, but don't make it nothing either. The record is yours. No one can walk you out the door with it.